Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be venturing into the middle of nowhere for some truly terrifying stories. But before the video begins, I need to let you know that we are hosting a mega giveaway this month. There are only 3 boxes left, and a new box does become available every 3 days. As you guys absolutely by now know, today is the 3rd day for your chance to win box number 8. Tomorrow a winner will be announced, and then there'll only be 2 boxes left. So make sure to get your entries in. In order to enter, all that you need to do is to subscribe. Make sure you have pressed that little bell icon. Oh, and as a note, YouTube actually has taken the bell icon off for some people, so make sure you still have it pressed. Leave a comment and make sure you've dropped a like. And with that, you'll be fine and dandy. Just make sure you've done that for each video out in the 3-day period, as that's what you need to do for your entry to qualify. But don't worry. There are also going to be a handful of consolation prizes to those of you who didn't win a box, and will of course only be eligible for those of you who have persevered and commented and liked every video in May, which finishes today. Best of luck everyone, but for now it is time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. To preface this, I want to say, last year, I spent about 32 days in the woods, either scouting, hunting or fishing. The year before that, I spent about 22 days. This doesn't include my regular hunts and camping adventures, which, in the past 3 years, adds up to just over 100 days. I've been hunting since I was 9. And have spent a lot of time outdoors, in various different parts of the USA and in Canada. I've seen and heard a lot of strange shit, but this one takes the cake. I was in Cohutta, North Georgia wilderness, for 7 days scouting for bears, wild hogs, and deer, prepping for a hunting trip later that year. I had hiked in about 10 miles, and then went off trail for another 3 to 5. Basically, I was out in the middle of nowhere. Since I was alone, I was using a hammock that has a built-in bug net, and I had a rain fly over it. I spent about 3 days halfway up a mountain, just looking for a good place to hunt. I saw 3 to 4 good-sized bears, about 10 hogs, and ran across a few good-sized deer. On the 4th day, I was going to head down to a small stream that I had marked on my GPS, and then set up camp, restock on water, and prep for the 2-day hike back. I could have gone faster, but I wanted to be able to look for any animal signs along the way. As I was approaching this small stream, I noticed a tent, which I was excited to see, as I had been completely alone for a few days, and it's always nice to run into another hiker. Generally, us wilderness folks are pretty down to earth, and as I got closer, I couldn't have been too far from where the camp was. So I set up my camp about 30 yards away, and with about 4 hours of daylight left, started cooking some dinner. 2 hours later, I started to wonder where this person was, given that I was in the wilderness, and it was over a day hike out. There wasn't much I could do, but I did hike around the site, making a circle as I went out, to try and look for any signs of a struggle in case there had been a bear attack. or maybe they had an injury. I got about a quarter of a mile out from the campsite, walking in a circle, and found nothing, much to my relief. As night came, no one showed. I started a fire, in hopes that the person would be able to find where they'd set up, and have some light. Fires burn really bright, and are very easy to see from far away. After eating, searching, and hoping that the person was going to make it back, I called it a night. I had a small flask with me, and took a couple of sips of whiskey, jumped into my hammock with my pistol, and attempted to go to sleep. Now, I sleep pretty hard. I mean, really hard, regardless of where I am. It literally annoys my friends, because I can always seem to fall asleep and stay asleep, regardless of where in the world we are. But this night was different. I felt like something was off, but I figured it was just me worrying about this person, who, by all my accounts, was completely missing. So for the first time in my life, I woke up to the sound of what I thought were footsteps, but not in the sense of footsteps on leaves, but what a heavy-footed person might make walking on an old wood floor. It was extremely loud. I got my gun, grabbed my headlamp, and stored it in a small compartment above me, and waited to see if it would stop. Right at that moment, it did. Then I saw something that scared the shit out of me. On my rainfly, the gleam of a flashlight, faint but there. I shouted, "Hello?" And right when I did, it sounded like 10 people suddenly began running away from me in every direction. I dropped out of my hammock to the ground, grabbing my gun and frantically turning on my headlamp, shining it all around me. But I didn't see shit. My heart was racing pretty badly, but I thought it might have just been the reflection of the moon on the rainfly. Yeah, that was it. And those footsteps running away were probably all the armadillos. As much as I tried to convince myself of my own utter lunacy, the problem was that there was no moon. I'd never seen an armadillo above 2,000 feet, and for some reason, the campsite I set up by was gone. The fire had been put out by water, and it was apparent because there was not a damn coal in that thing. I thought for sure it was 4 AM, but I had only been asleep for an hour at this point. I wanted to leave, but hiking out in the wilderness while it's dark is always a bad idea. So I grabbed my flask, took a sip of whiskey, removed my rainfly so that I could see out of my hammock, and tried my hardest to go back to sleep. I was laying down when I saw some light hit the tree above me. It was clear it was coming from downstream, and I got out of my hammock and started yelling, "Hey, you'll need help?" I got no response. I saw whatever was putting out the light, and it spun around and started heading downstream, really fast. At this point, my body had pumped through more adrenaline than it had blood, and I was exhausted from it. I finally was able to fall asleep, and woke up at around 7 AM. When I did, I noticed that my water filter that I had left out was missing. It's a gravity filter, and it hangs on a tree filtering water down into my main bladder that I put on my backpack, and my water bladder sitting at the base of a tree. It looked like it was cut down the middle with a knife. They cut down my bear bag which had food in it and took some of it. The creepiest part of it all was that they went through my bag, which was right under my hammock, while I was sleeping. I checked the bear bag before, and I went back to sleep the second time, and it was still there, hanging, and my bag under my hammock hadn't been touched. I packed all my shit and hightailed it out of there, keeping my pistol close to me and moving as fast as I could. I ended up making the hike back in just under 15 hours. I hiked the trail part in the night, because I wasn't about to spend another night out there. I didn't see anyone on my hike out. There were no cars parked at the trailhead, and the DNR said they had only seen my car there. Since then, I haven't gone out there without any friends. I reported all of this to the local DNR, but they looked at me like I was crazy. Last year, I was with a buddy of mine, and we were going to do the Hart Creek Scramble in Alberta. But due to some health conditions he had, it was going to be too strenuous to complete, and we figured we'd make it an easy day and just do the simple trail. Now, we're both climbers and have been to Hart Creek for rock climbing in the past, and had a great time. So it wasn't a surprise to see the sporadic climbers on the mountainside as we went. Hart Creek is also pretty popular, and easy for people who just want to go and have a nice nature walk, and maybe indulge in a picnic. Anyway, so we walked in enjoying the day, watching climbers on our way by. We saw a couple even doing some multi-pitch climbing, which means basically leapfrogging up the route. We settled in for lunch about a half hour later, and left a couple of hours after that. On our way back, I remember seeing a climbing shoe in the creek and thinking, oh, someone must have lost this, and picked it up, when my buddy got my attention and I looked further downstream. Both climbers, a young man 29 and his partner, were both lying in the creek bed, rope and harness still attached, dead. It was very surreal. We had seen these people climbing not 2 hours before, making their calls, having a good time. The first reaction I had was that there was family right behind us, a husband and wife with a young daughter who were playing in the creek on the way down. We ran back and stopped them and explained as quietly as we could what was ahead, and before we knew it, Lucky Lou had come by. It turned out that the husband was an off-duty RCMP, and he took control of the situation. I later learnt we weren't the first on the scene, and that the authorities had been called. It was a very quiet ride back into town that day though. September 2010. My boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We had had a fantastic time, staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We stopped in a B&B about half of the way home and were planning to get home around 6 p.m. We all woke up early, at about 4 or 5, ready to set off again, when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me, and I'd had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone from stone to dirt. Around us, there weren't any farms anymore, just long, weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror for this journey. When surely enough, my boyfriend pointed out in front of a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road, cafe and car spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest, and all got out except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal car bits. As to be expected, we were the only visitors, and we parked up front. The sun was up, but no lights or people were around. I guessed they were still sleeping. It was about 6 in the morning after all. We all walked up to the scrap pile, and I had to fumble through looking for a wing mirror, or any sort of mirror that would do for the time being, until we could just get it repaired. Tony picked up what could be only described as at least a decade-old mirror, and suggested that we just take it and go. But me, being stupid sincere, insisted to give them money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door, and at first looked like he was pissed off and tired, then smiled to me a two-toothed smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, then seeing the boys approach, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror, and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought was fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio doors on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and they came over. They absolutely reeked. He gave them the mirror, and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat down on the patio chairs, and offered us some sandwiches, which I politely declined. But he insisted we must be hungry, and told me to come in, that women are best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave more sternly reinforced that we didn't want to come in. Ian muttered something, and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly, as he started asking questions. It started off innocently enough, like how old we were, where we were from and where we were going, and then it became a little more uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both what we like to do to each other, how often do we have intercourse, and weird private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men, who was meant to be fixing the wing mirror back on, with his hand grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio, Tony running after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car, and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even begin to imagine how terrifying that must have felt. I got into the back seat with her and consoled her, while Dave came around the other side and got in, and told us some nails were on the floor. We looked over, and there were around 12 of them arranged around the tire, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and were ready to go when Tony was the last to get into the car. He closed the backseat door, and we looked back and saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, running towards us. My vision adjusted, and when he got a bit closer, it became apparent that he was holding a rifle. A goddamn hunting rifle. At that point I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever, until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway. To this day, whenever I go to London, I will take the train instead. I am still shit scared that I will run into them again. I grew up in an extremely rural Midwestern state. My family lived in the country between two small towns, and I attended school in both small towns and knew most of the families in the area, either by face or by surname. One night, it was around 10 or 11 p.m, and I was leaving a high school basketball game in town. I was around 15 and driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, which is an early 90s Toyota, with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it more than 5 or 6 miles out of town, and I had about 7 left to go. I was on a long stretch of road that served as a shortcut between two main highways in the aforementioned towns, and wasn't heavily travelled. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited, and finally, a nice newer red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo pulled up. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside with a woman and 2 girls. He offered me his phone. I remembered noticing it was a track phone, which my friend and I at the time referred to as crack phones, because you couldn't trace the owners, and they are frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used a lot by people who can't afford a standard phone plan, but the family was driving a really nice vehicle, and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as odd. The phone got no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and finally gave up. The truck had been headed away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from. So when they offered me a ride, I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the trunk, and all of my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at the gas station on the way to their destination, and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car, I was caught off guard by the way the woman, who I assumed was his wife, and the 2 little girls, who I assumed were his children, were dressed. Conservative families, even Amish and Mennonites, but the man being otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a sort of flashy truck, and owning a cell phone, and the females' clothing surprised me. They all wore long, heavy skirts, with button-up blouses and thin bonnets on their heads. One of the girls seemed to have a disability, and made a grunting noise every so often. Other than her noise, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving in the opposite direction he'd been driving. The closest town the other way was still 15 or more miles, and it seemed out of his way. Out of politeness, I reminded him that I had come from Town A, knew everyone there, and could find a ride home. It was late, and I figured he needed to get his family to where they were going. That's when he told me that he was from Town B, and that he had a full gas can waiting at his house, and that he could take me there, and that he could bring me back to my car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary, and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away, and that he could drop me off, but he didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, but it seemed like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas. He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination. Or if he wanted to make sure I made it home, he could drop me off at home. In my uneasiness, I started making small talk. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which was surprising, but not totally unbelievable. Coming from a town of around 3,000 people, where I had spent the first decade of my life and where both of my parents still worked, you probably can guess that you meet a lot of people, as you bump into the same people constantly. I remembered wishing that I had paid attention to the construction company name on the side of the truck, since most company names in my area are named after a family. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started to get more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way late at night in a rural community to fix a fairly common mishap. I had no idea who they were, I have never seen them before, and I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone was undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to achieve, making me disappear would be pretty easy. I started kind of shrieking that they just dropped me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a fit of panic, I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn, take me home, please take me home right now." Finally, for the first time, the white spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed, "Just take her home." Outside of the girl's grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily on my road, pulled into a driveway, and let me out, and then reversed out the driveway so fast that the tires spat gravel, and I couldn't even see the license plate or the name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents to tell them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what the intentions were, and maybe they did just want to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. I spent various stretches of time backpacking and camping throughout the US, and have seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer town of sorts that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a run-down and really small town out in New Mexico that seemed to have one person living in it, on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were just fairly fresh. We spent a couple of days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town, and we never found a soul. We also found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawns, ensnared in barbed wire fencing that encompassed a 10 by 10 area in the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of the area that had decaying deer bodies. Looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage, and they were wrapped around it. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada, literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it as far as we know. We also came across a dead junkie on a road out to Olympia, obviously OD, as he had his arm tied and a needle in his hand. Eyes were glazed over and staring right ahead with his mouth slightly ajar. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, who are both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque, always up for exploring. We took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We loved those type of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north, and after a few minutes we saw a white pickup truck ahead of us going in the same direction. Suddenly he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway. His truck was still pointing in the direction we were going, and we tried to relax a little bit. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would always get within a few cars' lengths and then drop back a little, and then speed back up again to within a few cars' lengths. We were getting nervous, and we realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about this great idea we had to take a detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one had signal, which is typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town over, Mountainair. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slow, maybe 20 miles an hour if that. The pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us at 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical on these 55-mile-per-hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup truck. As we passed it, we saw another middle-aged man who was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup truck passed him, he pulled a U-turn and began to pull up behind him. As we watched this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt, these two men knew each other, and we were being now deliberately followed. And for the first time, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road, and we truly thought the old beat-up pickup truck guys had set a trap in the road and our vehicles would be disabled somehow. We were talking about driving into fields, and we were in an SUV, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper. An old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup truck inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got within inches of our back bumper, and Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles an hour and edging 90. The road was flat and deserted, but if anything had gone wrong, it would have been catastrophic. We were absolutely not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup truck pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us to get in front. If he got in front of us, and his buddy behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo Mission National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road onto the highway in front of us. As we came up onto the blue pickup truck, we saw the plate said, U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us, and both pickup trucks did a U-turn and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup truck to Mountain Air, and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what these guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put it all together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there who are like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on there, one thing's for sure, it isn't good. Yesterday morning, I was unfortunate enough to suffer a power cut and spend my day in total darkness. It's not something I enjoy. I ended up wandering around town throughout the day in order to kill some time. After spending a few hours at my old university, I decided that I should get a hotel for me and my dog, as the power outage was expected to last a few days, and we live in the south, where no air conditioning becomes a big issue very quickly. I finally managed to find somewhere nearby that will book for me and my pup without costing me an arm and a leg, and that's when everything started to go downhill. I would need to get a cab from my old school back home, and then to the hotel. Everything is within a 3-mile radius of each other, and I figured it would be simple. I wasn't aware that there was a little graduation ceremony that was going on late, so every I tried to call a cab, they wouldn't show up, or someone else would take them. When the sun was starting to set, I found someone who was a previous classmate of mine, and they kindly volunteered to give me a ride home, and I packed my stuff. I called another cab, and lo and behold, it didn't feel like coming. And since Uber wasn't working at the time, I decided I would take my bag and my pup myself and walk my happy butt the mile or so to the hotel, so that she could have a good rest. I started walking, and about a quarter of a mile of the way there, I hear someone behind me. Enter my nightmare. A 6-foot something brick house of a person, with a grisly look about them. They looked me up and down and said, "Hey, where are you going, girl?" Now, let it be known, I am new to this area. I am from the middle of nowhere, and this is horrifying to me. I decided my options were to be incredibly polite or to run screaming, so I fell back on politeness. After rejecting him taking my bags multiple times, he stated that he was walking to the place right next to my hotel. So I decided I would try and humanize myself as much as possible to keep a dialogue between us. I mean, it's not like I had much choice. There was nothing around other than some bushes and trees, and it's not like the wildlife surrounding me was going to come and spring to my assistance. He asked me questions about my family, friends, why I was here. I made up a bit of a story, that I had a family and I was here for graduation, so that it seemed like I had people who would know I was expected. Shortly after this, he reaches into his pocket and says, "You might need this," and he hands me a small knife. Not knowing what to say, I thank him a few times, and moments later, he is talking to himself before looking at me and inviting me to live with his niece and her boyfriend. Internally, I am screaming. I know I could do nothing. This guy has at least 1.5 feet on me and I'm exhausted. We continue walking, and he tells me he gets a good vibe from me, and could see us in a relationship and with a family. He keeps muttering to himself about tons of stuff. People, girls. It was very hard for me to make out. He then looks at me and says, "I had an epiphany." "Oh," I say. He just smiled and did a head shake, and kind of chuckled to himself, muttering, "Good night, good night." I figure it's alright. We're about halfway there and I'm holding a conversation, listening to how he went to prison for 2 years over a gun and how Snoop Dogg dedicated a song to him. We get to a very dark part of the walk, and he looks at someone on the same path as us and pushes me a little bit out of the way and says, "You walk here now, 'cause you're mine, little girlie." Suddenly, people walking to their cars from graduation walk past us, and I feel safer, and I know I am home free. As we approach the hotel parking lot, He asks if he can join me. I make up some excuse about how it's only booked for one person and that it's not in my values. He follows me into the lobby. He then follows me to the front desk. And I am told I can't stay because I am 20, not 21, and they had a recent policy change. My heart sinks, and he is attached to my side, and I can't tell anybody that I'm terrified. I see a worker at another desk, and I say I'm going to the bathroom. I whisper to her, "Please, can I talk to you somewhere? I'm in a small emergency." She escorts me away, and I explain that he'd been following me from the middle of nowhere down to here. She sits me down and is listening. He's trying to currently talk to another person into using their ID for what he is calling now our room. A woman employee walks over and says, "Do you know this girl?" And he replies baffled, "Yeah, this is my girl. We've known each other for years." She looks right at him and asks my name. She's my girl. My girl. That's what he says. She tells him if he doesn't leave the lobby, the police will be called. It ended up that she is a bartender. She sits me down and ended up helping me get my room, and I fully intended to thank her and the other woman properly. After an hour sitting in the bar and her negotiating my stay, she looks at me and says, "If you wouldn't have been able to stay, I would have paid for you or taken you home, because he is still out there." I woke up next morning, and I was told that he was in and out of that place, just waiting outside. Thankfully, by the time I departed, a few days later, he was gone. So me and my best friend, including 3 others, were hanging out in this field about midnight to 1 in the morning. You could only access this field with an off-roading vehicle. Our 3 other friends wandered off, and I should mention only one of them is a girl. So me and my best friend were walking by ourselves, and we come across this girl, wearing a white t-shirt with her back to us. We thought it was our friend, since there were no other cars up there, so we call her name. She didn't move. We got closer and called again, and we were about 5 feet behind her and called again. She didn't move again. We freaked out and headed back to the car and found the girl who we thought it was, and she wasn't wearing a white t-shirt. We thought it was a prank at first, but we realized it couldn't have been her for many reasons. We still don't know who or what she was. The scariest part is that she was near some government building or something. No one knows what it is, because on Google Earth it's surrounded by trees. My best friend tried to go there, and some guys in a car drove up and told him not to come back or he would be shot. About 4 years ago, I was a junior at a small college in LA County. Bordering my town was a large cavernous region known as Turnbull Canyon. It's the kind of place that has a healthy amount of creepy folklore surrounding it, with an area emphatically known as Hell's Gates. Stories of cultic activity, gang killings, abandoned mental institutions, and the like. The kind of shit you hear about any place old enough to have a reputation. In reality, most of the stories were spurned from a tragedy that occurred years prior. A woman's body was found at the base of a canyon, and from then on, the rest is history. Nevertheless, when a photographer friend asked me and another buddy to go out to the canyon with him in order to take some photos of the LA skyline, I had to oblige. The canyon was only about a 30-minute drive from our campus, and we had been listening to the King of Limbs the entire drive, which proved to be the perfect ambience to get me feeling pretty anxious about our little excursion. I should also note that I'm a pretty anxious guy in general, so travelling out to a remote area preceded by its reputation for scary occurrences admittedly had me thinking twice about the decision. At the top of the canyon, there's a small residential area, a few ritzy houses surrounded by trees and woods. In order to venture into the canyon itself, you have to follow a main trail, with several smaller arteries that split off in other directions, but ultimately culminate after a couple of miles or so. At the base of a steep hill adorned an old water tower overlooking the city. Anyhow, we parked our car at the top of the canyon road, divided up the camera gear, and made our way out to the trailhead, with it being around 1 AM by this point. After walking the trail for about 5 minutes, Dave the photographer decided it was time to set up his first shot, while Jeff, our other friend, and I kept watch. Eventually he got the shot he needed, and we continued walking for another 5 minutes or so, before Dave decided to set up his next shot. At this point, the trailhead had disappeared behind us completely, and we were a little less than a quarter of the way to the water tower. While setting up the tripod, we noticed the faint glow of headlights off in the distance, which was strange because the trail isn't meant for cars, nor is it big enough for them to pass through. If I recall, it's only about 5 feet wide with shrubbery on both sides. This was clearly a bit of a red flag for us, as we were the only people out there. So we immediately packed up our things and ducked off into the brush, waiting for the car to pass on. Eventually, an old pickup truck idled to a stop about 50 yards from where we were hiding. The truck itself was old and rickety, sitting on a lifted chassis, the bed of which was missing entirely. Growing up in the country, I knew it as the type of truck typically owned by backwoods woodfolk, who lived in the boonies and preferred to be left out on their own devices. We watched in agonizing anticipation as the truck just idled in place for several minutes, before flooring it down one of the other trails, the roar of the engine echoing throughout the canyon. Clearly, we were spooked at this point, the three of us speculating as to our next step. Jeff and I were reluctant to continue, while Dave assured us that it was probably nothing. Perhaps just a guy off-roading, as he put it. So with great reluctance, Jeff and I trudged on behind Dave towards the water tower to get his final shots. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the truck. I mean, I knew plenty of people in high school who would go off-roading, for fun in the woods, but never on finicky canyon trails barely wide enough to hike on, let alone drive. It just didn't sit right with me. After walking without interference for about an hour, we finally made it out to the water tower, climbed the hill to the top, and took in the view of the city. Dave once again started setting up his equipment, while Jeff and I stood on both sides of the water tower, keeping watch just in case the truck came back. Nothing. At this point it was around 3 AM, and Dave decided that he has gotten all the shots he needed. So we pack up our equipment and commit to heading back before it gets too late. Seeing as how all of us have class in just a few hours, just as we were preparing to descend the hill, The truck comes roaring out of the canyon below us, back onto the trail, at which point the driver attempts to climb the hill, revving the engine loudly. Scared shitless, the three of us slid off the side of the hill into the brush, clinging to plants and rocks, as the truck finally made it atop the hill, slowly driving around the tower. We could see the glow of the headlights each time it circled above us. After waiting for nearly 10 minutes, while also trying to not make any noise, the truck eventually descended the hill, stopping in the middle of the trail not more than 100 yards away. We watched as a scruffy man in his mid-50s stepped out of the idling truck and into the glow of its headlights, moseying around while looking at the ground. He then knelt down, looking at something in the dirt, surveying the area intently. As he did so, it became increasingly apparent that he was tracking something. Our footsteps. This next part chills me to the bone. As my friends and I huddled together watching in complete terror, another man, wearing a long, dark parka, emerged from the brush, right there where we had been hiking, joining the other man at his side. Apparently he had been out there the entire time we were walking the trail, just watching us, following behind us at a safe distance. The two of them talked for a long while, but we couldn't hear a word. They continued scanning the area, looking for our footprints, but eventually got in the truck and drove off down one of the forks in the trail. We sat in silence for a long time, waiting nearly 2 hours just to ensure the coast was clear, at which point we made like hell back to the car, down the canyon, then back to our campus, just in time for class. I am a fairly avid camper and have a couple of stories to share. We went on a 5-day gold panning trip with a couple of buddies of mine. We drove 6 hours down using logging roads, and we were talking totally overgrown roads with trees having been removed from the road to pass. We saw not one human the entire time we were out there, except for our third night at 3 AM. We were sitting around the fire drinking some beers, squatting at bugs and shooting the shit, when I hear something. I look over and notice some lights in the trees. What the? It's a truck, driving up the logging road that we had cleared ourselves to get there. At 3 AM. The truck gets up to where we were, pulls into where we made our small camp, and sits there for about 10 seconds, while we all kind of stare in shock at one another. I get up and start walking towards the truck to say hello, and ask what the heck he was doing out there at 3 AM on abandoned logging roads, when the truck just backs up, turns around and drives off. The guy just drove 6 hours down logging roads through the night, sees us and leaves without saying a word? We're all just sitting there going, what the hell? We all figured this guy was driving down the road, getting out and coming back to kill us in our sleep. Next morning, we head down the road and nothing. They didn't set up camp or anything. Just left. We figured we were likely camping out near a grow-up for one of the gangs, and they were likely coming out to check who had come out to their spot, or they were there to pick the crop in the middle of the night. I'm grateful they left quickly, but I know that if certain things were true, that could have ended very differently. On another occasion, We were driving down a bunch of logging roads at 4 AM. I know, we love nighttime. Looking for a campsite we had driven past. We took a wrong turn and drove right into a drug operation, crashing out the crop. We turn a corner and blam, floodlights, and 15 guys are staring at us in the middle of the forest down logging roads. We sort of turned around and got the hell out of there. The third story. One time, I was out hiking in the backwoods with a buddy of mine, way out with nobody in sight. In the evening, I start to gather some wood for a campfire, and I pulled this stick out of the trees. This stick is maybe 5 foot long and 3 feet wide, and it looks like a nice walking stick, straight and mostly smooth. Then I noticed that the end of it is really smooth, like it's been whittled by someone. Then I'm thinking, oh wow, what are the odds of that? It is a real walking stick. Someone has carved a smooth handle on one end. Nope, it's not a handle, it's a penis. Someone had carved the end of this stick into a penis. Someone was definitely doing something dirty in the forest. This wasn't some crude carving. This was a work. Like the person put hours into carving this, and was very good at carving. This was a 6-inch dong, carved with love and feeling, right down to it having bulging veins and a very fine bulbous. What the hell? So I took the dick stick back to camp and threatened to poke my buddy with it, yelling that the forest was going to give him tree AIDS. Ah, good times. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I want to apologise for yesterday's huge blunder. I'm honestly completely baffled by what happened. I went to review and was just shocked. So yeah, for those of you who must have listened, it must have been really weird to get, you know, the weird sound effect and the outro mix up, well, the intro mix up, sorry, right, you know, at 44 minutes. I'm honestly clueless. I do double check my work, so it's pretty strange. Maybe the video was haunted, I don't know. But anyway, I've double checked this video now, and it's not happened this time, so yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Also, as I've told you before, and you know, maybe you're sick of hearing it now, but I'm going to say it one more time. You know, all my friends have started off, well, my friends and brother who's continued his YouTube channel, you know, are persevering, punching out those videos, and it would really mean a lot to me if you guys would, you know, go show them a little bit of support if you haven't already. Maybe check them out. You'll probably enjoy the content, and it would mean a lot to me as they're important people in my life, and I think you'll enjoy what they make. So the videos at the very end are all linked to their channels, and I'd be really grateful if you could, you know, just pick one, go over and see if you like it. I'd really appreciate it, guys. Thanks. We're also sadly getting close to the end of the mystery box giveaway, and it's been fantastic. There are still 2 more boxes left, and a winner for this box will be announced tomorrow. So please be sure to get your entries in by dropping that like, leaving a comment, and making sure you've hit the bell icon, because YouTube takes it off, and make sure you've been subscribed as well. If you'd like me to read your story on my channel, as always, all you need to do is drop it into my Reddit or send it to my email. But anyway, for now guys, I am going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.